Hello, and welcome to Books in the World. I'm your host, Madeline Mealy-Holt, and I'm delighted to be here today with Paul Kemprecos. Hello, Paul. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for the invite.
First of all, I wanted to tell people that Books in the World is a production of the Cape Cod Writers Center, and it has been produced for since 1978 and continuously, and we like to say that as far as we know, it's the oldest continuously running book talk show in the country.
Really?
It could be. We just we don't know of any other. And the Writers Center, as you know, and as we were talking, was established 60 years ago by Marion Vulliamere, who was a very well-known Cape Cod personage, I think is one way of putting it. She was, you can tell us a little about her.
She was a big booster of writing on Cape Cod, and I think her group was the 1 o'clock or 12 o'clock scholars, and it was a writing group, and that was the predecessor of the Cape Cod Writers Conference, the Cape Cod Writers Center.
Right.
So she was quite the force. She was a writer herself, and she was great at encouraging writing. And there were so many writers on the Cape, and people who would like to be writers. So it was fertile ground for her.
It was interesting, and her mission statement is, actually I have it written down here, is to show how writers, illustrators, publishers, editors, and others in the literary field play their roles in the world of books and other communication media. So I like to tell people that I think one of the goals of Books in the World is to give people experience in being interviewed. You don't need that. I'm going to launch right into your background, which is extensive and long, and you've written quite a few books. Paul is the author of 9 books in the Cape Cod-based Aristotle Socarides private detective series. You have also co-authored 8 books with adventure writer Clive Cussler in the best-selling Numa Files. You've had 2 adventure books. Your most recent book is Killing Icarus, which is here, and I know we have a picture of it, which talks about the German glider flights on the Outer Cape as historical backdrop. Your next book is in the Aristotle Socarides series, and it is not yet published, but we're looking forward to hearing you tell us about it in a little while. It's called The God in the Sea. So,
well, the Killing Icarus was my very first standalone book in that it wasn't part of a series. It was the first time I used a female protagonist. So although I know it's had good, strong female characters, I had never had the main character female. I thought it was about time. And so, as you said, that the historic backdrop was the German glider flights and the German-American glider school in Southwell Fleet in the late 1920s. And I found that a lot of people didn't know that story. And I had been in the newspaper business on Cape Cod for 25 years, and I had picked it up 60 years ago was when I first heard about it, and I thought it would be a good theme for this. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to mention that there was quite a bit of military history on Cape Cod. There was an air base and Army base in Wellfleet. So this comes to the subject of a lot of your books, historical, a lot of historical information.
There's usually a historical plot. And in terms of The God in the Sea, I decided to do another Aristotle Socarides book. I had some ideas floating around for actually years. Sometimes these things are in the back of your mind for decades, and you finally get a chance to use it. So
Do you have a way of keeping track of these ideas?
Notebooks.
Do you know notebooks, card files?
I have copious notebooks. It's kind of a joke in my family.
Okay.
With my
Oh.
wife, I have notebooks with listings of my notebooks. And the basic story is that a fisherman, Provincetown fisherman, pulls up a trident, apparently ancient, and he enlists the aid of Aristotle, Socarides, who's an old war buddy, to find out where it came from, probably from an ancient statue in Cape Cod Bay. And this discovery unleashes a whole bunch of bad stuff, murders, and it has to do with international antiquities, smuggling. It's got kind of a slinky femme fatale. It's got an archaeologist. Then it's got his old pal, John Flagg, who's he knew going back to Vietnam, and who's a Wampanoag Indian from Martha's Vineyard, but also a CIA agent. And
Okay. And now I'm hearing where this all comes from. I was going to ask you to tell us about the Socarides series from the beginning, and since I've read one or two, I now recognize where all these characters come from. So just to go back a little bit, you started this character in this series back in the 90s? I
Yes,
have 1991 in my notes.
yeah, well, the first two books came out in '91. I think it must have been late '80s. I'd been thinking about.
Okay.
I was working for the Cape Codder newspaper, and I was covering the story of the Widow, the pirate ship that went down in 1717 off the coast of Wellfleet. And there was a lot going on. There were three groups after the rights to this, and they were all very colorful, and there was treasure involved, and I thought it would make a good nonfiction book. And I came up with a proposal, and it didn't go anywhere, so I thought, well, why not write a detective book? Since I didn't read them and I'd never written any fiction,
Really?
it was kind of, so then I came up with a character. I based it in part my own Greek American background, my father's side, and I wanted him to be philosophic rather than hard-boiled. I named him after my high school last name, after my high school English teacher, Chris Socarides, at Brockton High School.
Okay.
I gave him a family, which was unusual in the private eye, in particular his mother, who is loving but quite overbearing. She kind of runs the Parthenon pizza, frozen pizza empire. And so I did those. I did 6 books, and then Cussler asked me to work with him, and on the Numa Files, so I did 8 books with him. And when that collaboration ended, I wasn't sure what to do, and Clive's agent said, well, why don't you write another adventure? And Clive said, why don't you write another Socarides book? So I ended up doing both. And 15 years after the last one was published, I came out with Gray Lady, which is set mostly around Nantucket. Mm-hmm. And so I've been doing.
I want to go back. You wrote the Socarides series,
Mm-hmm.
4, 5, 6 books, and then your agent sent Cussler one of his books, one of your books, so that he could write a blurb for your cover. And was that the way it came about, that he found out about your books?
I think he was. It was Bantam Doubleday Dell. I think he was doing paperbacks for them. And my editor sent him a request for a blurb on the jacket, and he gave me a really good one. And then the next book came out, and he gave me another book which said, there's no better mystery writer in America than Paul Kemprecos. So I was pretty flattered. And then he called me up one night. I was living in Brewster. And he called me up one night out of the blue, and we had a chat, and that became sort of a a relationship. We're trading books maybe over the 5 or 6 years, and then when the publisher Simon & Schuster decided to do the Numa Files as a spin-off of his Dirk Pitt series, he asked me to do it.
So the Numa Files, I happened to read the Navigator, and one of the reviewers said that with its Cussler-esque abundance of corny similes and nonstop action woven into an intricate plot, combined with Kemprecos' warm, down-to-earth prose, it's hard to find action better than this smoothly paced novel. Once again, you can't go wrong with a book with Cussler on the cover. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the writing process. So Cussler asked you if you would co-author with him based on your characters. How does this happen? How does it work?
Well, he called me up and he said they were doing this, and I've told this story before. And he said you would do all the work, and I would do all the work, and he would get all the money.
Oh, well,
and
fine.
I said, what a deal that is!
What a deal!
And I was what is delicately writers say in between projects at the time. I was about ready to call it quits for writing. And I went over to see my wife, Christy, who had an office in Dennis Village, and I told her, I said, Cussler just called me and he wants me to work on this big series. And she said, well, what did you tell him? And I said, yes, but I don't know if I can do it. I've written regional detective books. I don't know if I can do complicated adventures set on a worldwide stage. And she said, well, you can do it. Then what else are you going to do?
Well.
So I did that. It was a sharp learning curve.
So how does it work? Who does what?
I wrote the books.
You write the book?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, well, try to get these stories. The first one I wrote 30 pages about the Andrea Doria being sunk on purpose. And then he thought that was wonderful. Then I wrote another 100 pages going where I thought would be a good place to go. And he called me up and he said, this is terrible. He said, I can't believe it's the same guy who wrote.
Oh, gosh.
And I said, yeah, well, I'm having problems. I need some guidance. And he said, well, call it out. So I went to Arizona for a weekend, and we went over these things. And he mostly told stories, but in between there, he died 2 years ago. So, but Cussler had this really great mind for twists and turns and characters and adventures. So if you listen carefully, you learn a lot from him. So I wrote the book. That was Serpent, and it was hit the New York Times bestseller list. And they all did that, including Polar Shift, which knocked Dan Brown and the Da Vinci Code off of first place, where it had been for a couple of years.
What was that one about?
Well,
in a word.
the destruction of the Earth.
Oh, okay.
Which is why, when we did Navigator, we toned it down, and that's more of a traditional treasure hunt with a little bit of Da Vinci type history.
So in the Navigator, and now you're saying in the new book, God and the Sea, you're talking about finding antiquities under the sea and elsewhere. So how did you get interested in antiquities? Where did that part of your...
Oh, before I became one.
Before you were an antique dealer?
Became an antique.
Before you became an antique.
I don't know. I've always been interested in history and or archaeology and mysterious stuff. And my Socarides books quite often had a background, a historical background that it would run parallel to the main story, then they would meet at some point. So Cussler saw that, and he liked my character, and that was another thing. When I told him I was having trouble coming up with my character, Kurt Austin character, He said, he told me that the series was sold to the publisher on the basis of the Socarides character.
Okay.
And I said, I didn't know that. He said, yeah. He said, think Soc.
That's all
He
you
said,
had to do, is keep writing Soc, more or less. I mean,
yeah.
not,
Well, when I thought about it, Soc lives in a boathouse on the edge of Pleasant Bay with his main cat, coon cat. The pneumophiles guy lived on a boathouse on overlooking the Potomac upper reaches of the Potomac River. Socarides had studied classic philosophy in college when he went for a while, and Kurt Austin figure it was his hobby. Philosophy was his hobby, and it kind of gave him a moral compass in the nasty things he had to deal with. So I thought, oh my God, they've already stolen my ideas out of this. So it must have been really dense because I didn't know this at the time. And so it did make it easier in coming up with the character.
Yeah. The NUMA organization, spell out for the audience that might not know what it is.
It stands for National Underwater and Marine Agency.
Okay.
And he envisioned in the Dirk Pitt series is kind of a marine type of NASA. It's a huge organization, and that looks into things under the ocean and on the ocean. And Dirk Pitt and his pal are always getting into scrapes. He's an undersea engineer. So it doesn't exist as that, but when Custer started looking for ships on his own, he decided to name that organization NUMA. So
that's
there is
not
an actual NUMA.
There is an actual NUMA.
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
group that that looks for wrecks, and for instance, they found the Hunley, which was a Civil War Confederate submarine that had been missing in Charleston Bay for a number of years. So NUMA found that. So that's NUMA. And then the concept was, well, when Dirk Pitt is saving the world, this side of the world, what's the rest of NUMA doing? So they said, let's come up with another team. And it was the NUMA Special Assignments Team. And it was Kurt Austin and Joe Zavala, kind of equivalent to Dirk Pitt. But Custer was brilliant. He came up with an oceanographer from Woods Hole, and his wife, who was also an oceanographer. And so he came up, the rest of the team was a married couple, which was really great because it makes for some interesting dynamics. Instead of just having the guys a buddy relationship, which you had a loving couple, but they were adventurous and they did all kinds of things together. So it was brilliant.
In one of the scenes I read, the NUMA people could go down to look at, they go down to shipwrecks, and if the shipwreck happened 600 BC, am I exaggerating? I'm not sure, but which leads to one of my questions. They could sort of recreate the conditions around that particular wreck from their computer modeling, I guess. And so my question was, how much of the scientific material is accurate and how much is it fantasy, made up, your talent, Cussler's talent?
Well, the whole science of underwater exploration is going advanced by leaps and bounds. And since I started doing this, there's just such amazing stuff coming out of Woods Hole, the institution, and so there's always a scientific basis as far as the equipment was concerned. But I mean, I fooled around. I came up with a sub. There was a rescue sub, and I called it the Lamprey, and that was something I made.
You made up.
Made up.
What
but you have to
about
keep
research?
the science has to be accurate
Okay,
and believable,
yeah.
although the stuff they do is often unbelievable.
Yeah. How about research? Does someone help you with your research, or you
No,
just?
I've always done my own research. The Cussler books took a lot of research because they were multi-plot, and all kinds of things happened. For instance, the polar shift, I had to research the whole idea of a concept where the poles shift on the Earth, and this could cause really big problems. And the concept of that book was that there was a group that was trying to use polar shift science, which I made up, the device, and it would precipitate a polar shift. And my thing was that they were just trying to do it to make a point, but they didn't know that it could actually destroy the whole Earth. So that was really far-fetched. It was a fun book. I pushed the formula. I was always pushing the formula because I was more interested in character, and sometimes I'd get criticized for it, and then I'd say,
What do you mean by that? Too many characters?
the action. There's a certain formula to the Custer books, and and it's been successful. And if you deviated, then I'd have to deal with Clive and his agent, and then they'd say, "Well, it's too late to do anything now," and blah blah blah. So they know they're going to send. But on Polar Shift, I was convinced at the end of the book. I was picking up really good signs from people who had read the book, and they really liked it. Mm-hmm. But I kind of convinced myself that wasn't a good book. So when it hit #1 and knocked the Da Vinci Code out, there was a little bit of shading fraud.
Oh, goodness.
And I won't get into the language, but I was able to go, well, I knew it was going to be a big hit all the time. So I dealt with that. And the books I write now have a lot of character. Even though there's action, I'm really more interested in character.
You're more interested in character, okay.
The plots tend to be intricate because...
Speaking of intricate plots, series, how do you decide, when you're writing a book in a series, how much of the guy's backstory do you tell in the current book? Suppose the person hasn't read your whole series and he doesn't know what happened in book 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. How do you deal with that?
I write the books so there's a backstory. It fills it in, and I try to do that. The very first book, Cool Blue Tomb, tells the whole family story, and the bookstore right up the street here, I cannot live without books.
Okay.
Is one of my biggest retail outlets, which is not huge, but he sells a lot of those books. Cool Blue Tomb, and I say, gee, I wrote that thing 30 years ago, and I hope I made all my mistakes back then. But he sells them, and people like the book, I guess, because even though it's a different era, it's that the verities are the same, that love, hate, envy, jealousy, these things are eternal, and they go back to the Bible.
Yeah.
And so you just put them in on a different setting, and off you go. So I try and do a section, and invariably the family is involved in my plots, so I have to go back to the family and run that through.
Yeah. Well, I read the Mayflower Murders as knew I was going to meet you. I said I have to read a couple of your books, and it was written in the 90s. I think it was written in the 90s, the Mayflower Murders.
Yes.
And I loved it because it was about the Cape for one thing, and I got a vivid idea of who some of the characters might be that I wouldn't run across. The Wampanoag,
Yeah.
the people that are in a world that is a little bit out of my sphere of knowing about people, and I thought it was great. I didn't feel it was dated at all.
Well, the theme of that was casino, Native American casino gambling, and that whole controversy hasn't changed that much. The Wampanoag is still fighting to get a
Right.
casino, and that goes back and forth, and it's got into national politics and the whole rather seamy business of casinos, and so the book had some. The stuff in it wasn't old,
Right.
although it
right,
was about
right,
the pilgrims
right.
and all that.
Well, I hate to say it, but we're running out of time.
Okay.
And I want to tell you and the audience that I'm looking forward to your next book, God in the Sea, because it's got these same characters in it, and I
Well,
want to see what they're up to.
I just got the. I don't know if you've put it on.
It'll be put on the screen, the cover.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Just a
yeah.
quick explanation of that. I wasn't quite sure.
We don't really have much time,
Okay.
so quick explanation.
book.
I'll give you 30 seconds. Go ahead, give it just, we're going to have to probably save that, and next
Okay.
time you give a talk in front of an audience, or you can come back, and we'll talk some more about that when you have the actual book ready, and we'll talk some more. You're laughing. So.
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for listening, and I wish you well. There's about 10 questions that I haven't asked you, and some things that I know you wanted to say. So if you've enjoyed this interview, you can go to the Cape Cod Writers Center website. There's a page there that lists our last 10 or so. And then they'll take you to YouTube, where you'll see a number of authors, as well as Paul's interview. And we want to thank the Cape Media Center, and look forward to meeting many more Cape authors and other authors from the region here on our set of Books in the World. So thank you for listening, and thank you, Paul, for coming. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. It was great.